I had not heard a clock strike in my own house for 3 years, and I had come to prefer it that way. Silence, you understand, asks nothing of a man. It does not remind him of the hour his brother did not live to see, nor of the ones piling up after, indifferent, one on top of another, like snow on a grave that no thought ever comes to clear. So when Hargreave, my steward, stood in the doorway of the North Library that gray November morning and told me a clockmaker had come up from Kettleby and was, at that moment in my great hall, I did not at first understand him. The words arranged themselves slowly, as everything did in those years. "A clockmaker," I said. "Yes, your grace." "In my hall." "At the long case clock by the stair." I could not stop. That is, I told the person you had given no such order, but... "Then the person will leave." Hargreave did not move. He was a good man, gray at the temples, who had served my father and then me and had watched me shut this house against the light one shutter at a time. He had learned the shape of my silences the way a sailor learns weather. And so I understood from the fact that he did not go that there was something he had not yet said. "The entail, your grace," he told me quietly. "Mr. Aldous was most particular. The commissioners come in the spring to certify the estate is kept in good order and repair before the succession is settled. The clocks are named in the inventory. A house of stopped clocks, forgive me, will be marked a house not kept. Your cousin's solicitor has already written twice to inquire after their condition." My cousin. Everything in those years seemed to arrive with my cousin's name attached to it, the way damp arrives with cold. I set down my book. I remember that I did it carefully, as if it might break, though nothing in me had felt breakable in a long while. I had gone past breaking into a kind of frozen ground, hard the whole way down. Then I rose and went out to send the clockmaker away myself, because I did not trust that anyone else in that house had the heart left to do it unkindly, and unkindness that morning seemed the shortest road back to quiet. The great hall of Harrowmere is a cold cathedral of a room, all oak and stone, and it was colder still for being unlit, the tall windows shuttered, the fires unlaid. I came down the stair with my anger already arranged on my face like a mask I had worn so often it had grown to fit, and stopped 3 steps from the bottom, because the person at my clock was not what I had expected. I had expected a stooped old tradesman with spectacles and a leather roll of tools. What I found was a young woman. She stood before the long case clock with her sleeves turned back to the elbow and her bonnet set aside on the settle, as though she had come to work in her own kitchen. Her hair was dark and plainly dressed, a few strands escaped at her neck, and she had the clock's door open and her whole attention inside it, the way a physician bends over a patient he has not yet given up on. She had heard me, I knew. The stair at Harrowmere announces every footfall, but she did not turn, and she did not startle, and she did not drop into the flurried curtsy that the sight of me had lately taught everyone in 3 counties to perform. She finished looking at whatever she was looking at. Only then did she straighten, and turn, and regard me with a pair of steady gray eyes that held no fear in them at all. "You'll be the Duke," she said. "I will be nothing you have any business with," I answered. "This clock has not run in 3 years, and it will not run now. You may pack your tools and go back down to Kettleby, and take with you my steward's apology for bringing you up the hill on a fool's errand." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked back at the clock, and something crossed her face that I would come to know very well, though I did not know it then. A small, private disagreement kept behind the teeth. "It's not broken," she said. I did not say it was. "No," she wiped her fingers on a cloth at her waist. "You said it doesn't run. Those are different things, your grace. A broken clock can't run. This one won't, which is another matter and generally a mended one." She nodded at the open case. "Weights are down. Pendulum's been stopped by a hand, not a fault. Someone laid a finger against it and held it till it died. There's dust in the movement, but the movement's sound. Your grandfather's, I should think. It wants cleaning and winding, and it wants an hour of my time, and then it will keep the hour as faithfully as it did the day it was made. She paused. Somebody loved it once to build it so well. It seems a pity to let it stand there pretending to be dead. I have thought since that no one had spoken to me so plainly in years, and that this was precisely why her words went in where softer ones had glanced off. Everyone at Harrowmere handled me as one handles cracked glass. This woman spoke to me as one speaks to a man. "Who are you?" I said. "Eleanor Whitby. My father kept the clock trade in Kettleby." Whitby and Son, though there was never a son, only me, and he taught me the whole of it before his hands went. He died at Michaelmas. She said it without asking for anything, not pity, not the softening of my face. A plain fact laid down beside the other plain facts. There's no one else this side of York can do this work now. Your steward wrote to my father. I came in his place. The name Whitby stirred something old and small in me, my grandfather's day. A bent old man on a stool in the servants' passage, oiling the kitchen jack while I watched. A boy of 6, forbidden to touch and touching anyway. I put the memory down where I put all such things. "I am sorry for your father," I said, and found, to my surprise, that I meant it. "But you have come for nothing. The clocks at Harrowmere are to remain as they are. That is my order, and it is not one I explain." "Then I'll be marked as failing to complete a contracted work," she said, "and I'll not be paid, and Whitby and Son will have one more black mark against its name in a year it can't afford any. And your commissioners will come in the spring and find 9 stopped clocks in a house that's meant to be kept in good repair, and they'll draw the conclusion any sensible person draws about a house where all the clocks have died." She met my eye. "I don't say this to move you, Your Grace. I don't imagine much moves you. I say it because you asked who I am, and the whole of who I am is a person with a trade and a name to keep, standing in a house that would rather pretend time has stopped than let a stranger touch it. I understand that better than you'd credit, but the clocks don't know they're grieving. They only know they're standing still, and standing still isn't the same as rest. I should have sent her out into the November rain. I had sent out kinder people for lesser trespasses. There was a physician from Leeds who had come, the second winter, sent by my aunt to look at my melancholy. I had shown him the door before he had his gloves off. There was a curate and a cousin's wife with a basket, and a matchmaking dowager or two who had heard that the Duke of Harrowmere was young still and rich and unmarried and buried alive, and had thought to dig me up. I had sent them all back down the hill. I was very practiced at it. But I did not send Eleanor Whitby out into the rain. I told myself it was the entail. I told myself it was the commissioners, and my cousin's solicitor, and the black mark I would be putting against a dead man's daughter for no better reason than that I could not bear the sound of my own house being alive. That is what I told myself, standing on the 3rd step of my own stair, looking at a plain young woman with clock oil on her fingers and no fear in her face. "You may clean the movement," I heard myself say. "You may not wind it. You will do your work in silence. You will not seek me out. And when the last of them is oiled you will go, and this house will be as it was." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, she was too careful for that, but the ghost of the place a smile would go. "Silence I can manage, Your Grace," she said. "I've kept a shop with 100 clocks in it. You learn to hear the quiet under the ticking. It's a friendlier quiet than this one, I'll say that." And she turned back to the long case clock and put her hands inside it, and I went back up my own stair like a man retreating from a field he was not sure he had won. I did not know then that I had just let the first thaw into a house I had frozen on purpose. I did not know that a woman from Kettleby with a dead father and a mortgaged shop would do what physicians and curates and dowagers could not, which was to reach the man at the bottom of the frozen ground and put a warm hand against him and refuse, quietly, to be afraid. But I am ahead of myself, and Eleanor Whitby taught me before all was done that the hour comes when it comes and not before. So let me tell it in its order. You will want to know how a man comes to stop all the clocks in his house, and I find I can tell it now, though for a long time I could not. His name was Julian. He was my brother, younger than me by 4 years, and he was everything I was not, open where I was guarded, laughing where I was silent, forever coming in from the stables or the moor with mud on his boots and some absurd tale on his lips, filling whatever room he entered the way sunlight fills it, without effort, without thought, simply by being what he was. Our father died when I was 22 and Julian 18, and the whole weight of Harrowmere, the tenants, the accounts, the county's expectations, the cold dignity of the title, came down on me, and I bore it, and Julian did not have to, and I was glad. I would have borne twice the weight to keep him free of it. He was the light of the house. I told myself I was the one who kept the house standing, so the light would have somewhere to shine. He drowned in the tarn above the West Moor on the 9th of November, 3 years before Eleanor Whitby stood in my hall. It was nothing. That is the thing I could never make anyone understand and never tried. It was nothing. A gray afternoon, a frozen edge that was not frozen through, a dog gone out too far onto the ice after a bird, and Julian laughing and going after the dog because of course he did, because he could no more leave a creature to drown than he could stop being himself. The dog came back. Julian did not. I was in the accounts room when they carried him in. I remember the clock on the mantel there said 20 minutes past 3, and I remember thinking, with a clarity that has never left me, that it had no right to go on saying anything at all. I stopped it myself that night. I laid 2 fingers against the pendulum and held it until it hung dead, and something in me eased as though I had refused to let the wound close over him, as though so long as the clock stood still at the hour of his death, I had not truly consented to a world that would go on without him in it. Then I went through the house, room by room, and stopped every clock I found. The great long case in the hall, my grandfather's masterwork, the bracket clock in the drawing room, the little enameled thing my mother had loved, the tall clock on the stair, 9 in all. I stopped them one by one, and I shut the shutters, and I dismissed all but a skeleton of the servants, and I settled into the silence like a man settling into cold water, and I stayed there 3 years. I know how it sounds. I knew even then. But grief is not reasonable, and a man who has lost the one person who made him more than his title will do strange things to keep from feeling the clock move him further and further from the last hour he was whole. The stopped clocks were my whole argument with the world. They said, "Not yet. He was here so recently. Do not make me go on." And into that argument, one gray November morning, walked Eleanor Whitby, who thought that standing still was not the same as rest, and who was, God help me, right. She came up the hill every day for a fortnight. I kept to my rooms and to my word. I did not seek her out, but a great house is a whispering thing, and I could not help but know where she was in it. She began with the hall clock and worked outward. Hargreave, who found excuses to bring me things that did not need bringing, reported her progress in the careful voice of a man who has noticed a change in the weather and is not sure whether to name it. "She's a serious young person, Your Grace," he told me on the 3rd day. "Doesn't waste words. The staff have taken to her. Mrs. Poole says she eats her bread and cheese in the kitchen and asks after everyone's people and never once asks after you, which the staff find more restful than you might think." A pause. She hums. When she's at the work, only a little. I don't think she knows she does it. I did not answer that. But that evening, walking a corridor I had no business walking, I passed the drawing room where she was at the bracket clock, and I heard it. A low thread of a tune, half under her breath, some old thing from the Dales, tuneless and tuneful at once, the sound a person makes when their hands are busy and their heart is quiet. I stood outside the door in the dark longer than I will admit. It had been 3 years since Harrowmere had made any sound but the wind. I had forgotten that a house could hold a human noise so gently. She did not wind the clocks. She had given her word and she kept it, and every clock she finished she left standing dead, cleaned, oiled, sound, ready and silent. Its hands stopped where I had stopped them. There was something almost unbearable in it, when I understood what she was doing. She was making every clock in my house perfectly capable of running, and leaving every one of them still, out of respect for an order she plainly thought was folly. She was giving me back the choice I had taken from myself 3 years before, one clock at a time, and asking nothing and waiting. On the 9th day I broke my own word and went to find her. I found her in the long gallery, at the tall clock on the north wall, the 7th of the 9, with a lamp set on the floor beside her because the shutters there had not been opened in 3 years, and the gallery kept its own dusk even at noon. She had a fine brass instrument in her hand, some gauge of her father's, and she was measuring something inside the movement with the absorbed stillness of a person who has forgotten she can be watched. "You said you would not seek me out," she said without turning. "I said a great many foolish things that morning." That made her turn. She looked at me for a moment in the lamplight, and I saw that she had a smudge of oil along one cheekbone where she had pushed her hair back with the heel of her hand, and that she was tired. There were shadows under the steady gray eyes, and that she had walked up a wet hill 9 days running to work in a dead man's house for a master who had forbidden her to bring his clocks to life. And I felt, for the first time in 3 years, ashamed of the cold I had made. "I have come to ask you something," I said, "and I find I do not know how to begin it because I have not asked anyone anything in a long while. I have only told them." "That's the way of it with grief," she said. "It makes a tyrant of the gentlest man because ordering the world about is the one thing that feels like doing something when there's nothing to be done." She set down the brass gauge. "My father was the same at the end when his hands went and he couldn't work. He'd rule the shop from his chair like a general, and I'd carry out his orders, and we both knew the orders were only a way of not saying the thing underneath." She tilted her head. "What did you come to ask, Your Grace? Why do you leave them stopped?" She was quiet a moment. "Because you told me to." "You think it folly, you said as much." "I think a great many things folly that are none of my business," she said. "I clean the clock, I don't clean the man. That's not the work I was hired for, and I'd not thank a stranger for trying it on me, so I don't try it on you." She wiped her hands. "But since you ask, yes, I think leaving them stopped is a folly, not because a stopped clock is a small thing, because it's not. Every one of these was made by a man who wanted to give the people who'd live here after him a way to hold the hour in their hands. That long case in the hall, your grandfather sat with that movement for the better part of a year. I'd staked the shop on it, cutting those wheels by lamplight, and he did it so that his grandchildren would hear it strike and know they were held inside something larger than themselves that went on keeping faith with them whether they slept or waked. You've silenced all of that, and I understand why. But every hour they don't strike is an hour that man's gift goes unopened, and that seems to me a second grief piled on the first, and one nobody made you carry. That's what I think. You did ask." I had not been spoken to like that since Julian. He had been the only one who ever told me the truth, because he had loved me too much to lie and been too unafraid of me to flatter. To hear it again, in a woman's plain voice, in a cold gallery, 3 years into the silence, I cannot describe what it did to me. It was like warmth against a limb gone so numb you have forgotten it can feel, that first terrible ache of the blood coming back. "My brother built things," I said, and I had not meant to say anything of the kind. "Not clocks, boats, little ones for the tarn when we were boys. He had no gift for it. They leaked everyone. But he'd sit on the bank all afternoon bailing and laughing and setting them out again, and he could not be made to see that the enterprise was hopeless because he did not think anything was hopeless. He thought the world was made to be enjoyed and that people who did not enjoy it had simply not tried hard enough." I stopped. "He drowned in that tarn, 3 years ago, the 9th of November. That is the hour the clocks are stopped at, 20 minutes past 3. She did not say she was sorry. She did not reach for me, or soften her face into the practiced sympathy I had fled from in every other person who had tried to say a kind thing to me. She only stood very still in the lamplight and let the words be in the room, the way you let a frightened animal come out from cover in its own time, and then she said, very quietly, 'He'd have hated the quiet then, a man like that.' And I laughed. God forgive me, I laughed. A broken, rusted sound I did not recognize as my own, because it was true, It was so exactly and unbearably true. Julian would have loathed what I had done to Harrowmere. He would have thrown open every shutter and wound every clock and filled the hall with dogs and music and stamped in from the moor to tell me I was a great gloomy fool. He would have been ashamed of me. I had frozen the house to keep him close, and in doing so I had made it into the one thing he could not have borne, and I had never once let myself see it until a clockmaker's daughter said 7 plain words in a cold gallery. Yes, I said when I could, he would have hated it. She nodded, as though a difficult matter had been settled between us, and bent again to her work. And I stood and watched her hands move in the lamplight, sure and unhurried, and I did not want to leave the gallery, and I could not have told you why, except that it was the first room in 3 years that had not felt like a tomb. After that, I did not keep to my rooms. I told myself I was overseeing the work. A duke has every right to observe a tradesman in his house. But the truth, which I came to slowly and then all at once, was that I had begun to arrange my days around the sound of her, the low hum from whatever room she was in, the small clink of her tools, the murmur of her voice in the kitchen where she took her bread and cheese and asked after Mrs. Poole's married daughter and old coachman Tenby's rheumatism, and never, as Hargreave had said, after me. I found excuses to pass the doorways she worked behind. I found more and more that I did not need excuses and did not make them, and simply came and sat on a chair in the corner of whatever room held her, and watched her work, and we talked. We talked of everything and nothing. She told me of Kettleby, of the shop with its 100 clocks all striking at slightly different moments, so that the hour came in like a soft peal of bells rather than a single stroke, of her father teaching her to hear a movement's fault the way a shepherd hears a lamb in trouble 2 fields off. She told me of his last months, the hands he could no longer close, the pride that would not let him be helped, the night he had guided her fingers through the repair of a repeater watch he could no longer manage himself. His hands over mine, telling me what to feel for, and both of us knowing it was the last thing he'd teach me. She told it without weeping, but I saw what it cost her, and I understood, sitting in my corner, that I was not the only person in that room who had lost the one who made the world make sense, and that she had carried her grief up my hill every day, and set it down quietly at the kitchen table, and never once made it my burden or her excuse. I had turned my grief into a frozen kingdom, and made everyone who loved me live in the cold of it. She had folded her small and carried it in her breast, and gone on being kind. I do not think any sermon ever taught me as much. And I talked, which I had not done in 3 years. I told her of Julian, not the drowning, I could not yet, but the rest of him, the whole laughing, exasperating, luminous rest of him. And in the telling I got him back a little, because grief had frozen him too, had fixed him at 20 minutes past 3 on a gray afternoon. And now, talking to a woman who had never met him and listened as though she wished she had, I could let him be a boy bailing a leaking boat again, alive and absurd and mine. "You loved him very much," she said once. "He was the best of us. I was only the eldest." "That's not the same thing as the best," she said, "and it's a heavier thing to be most days. The best of a family gets loved for what he is. The eldest gets leaned on for what he does. I know which I'd sooner carry, and I know which wears a man out." She looked at me. "You've been the eldest a long time, Your Grace. I don't think anyone's asked in a good while what you are underneath what you do." I could not answer her. I looked at the clock she was mending so that I would not have to look at her, and she let me. And after a moment she began to hum again, very low, and went on with her work, and left me in the mercy of the silence she had made warm. It was near the end of the fortnight that my cousin came. Aldous Marchmont was my father's brother's son, and if I did not wake, Harrowmere would be his, for I had no wife and no child, and had given the county no reason to think I ever would, buried as I was in a dead house on a dead hill. He was not a wicked man, my cousin. I want to be fair to him, even now. He was a frightened, grasping, ambitious man who had persuaded himself that his ambition was concern, which is the commonest and most dangerous kind of villainy, because it can look in the glass each morning and see a good face. He came up my hill in a fine carriage with a solicitor beside him, and he did not ask to see me. He walked into my hall as though it were already his. I came down the stair to find him standing where Eleanor had stood a fortnight before, but there was no likeness in it. She had stood before the clock as a physician before a patient. He stood before it as an auctioneer before a lot. The solicitor, a dry man named Frayne, had a portfolio open and was writing. "Gabriel," my cousin said, with a warmth that did not reach his eyes. "You look, well, you look as one expects. We did knock. Your man seemed reluctant." "He was following his orders," I said. "What do you want, Aldous?" "Only to help." He spread his hands. "Cousin, I'll not dress it up. The commissioners come in the spring. You know what they'll find, a great estate shut up dark, the master seeing no one, going nowhere, the clocks all stopped these 3 years. Frayne here has taken counsel. There is a provision, an old one but sound, by which a man who cannot or will not manage his affairs, whose conduct gives just cause to fear for the estate, may have the management passed to the next in line under the court's eye for the estate's protection." He said it gently, so gently, watching my face. "I don't wish to use it. God knows I don't. But Gabriel, look at this house. Look at yourself. Any commissioner in England would call this the conduct of a man not in his right mind, and I would be failing my duty to our name if I let Harrowmere go to ruin because you cannot rise from your grief. Come away with me. Let a physician see you. Let me take the weight. It's what any loving family would." "Get out of my house," I said. But I heard it under my own anger. I heard how it would sound to a commissioner. 9 stopped clocks, shut shutters, a master who saw no one and went nowhere. A house held at 20 minutes past 3 for 3 years. Aldous was not lying about what it looked like. He was only lying about why he cared. And a court would not weigh the why. A court would weigh the clocks. "I'll go," Aldous said, gathering himself, "since you ask it so kindly. But the commissioners come in the spring, cousin, and I will be with them, and I will tell them the truth of what I've seen, because I must. Unless," he paused at the door, "unless by then there is some sign that the master of Harrowmere has rejoined the living. A house set to rights. A door that opens. Clocks that keep the hour like a Christian house instead of standing stopped at the minute of a death." He put on his hat. "I do hope there is, Gabriel. I truly do. It would grieve me to have to be your rescuer against your will." And he went, and the fine carriage bore him and his dry solicitor back down my hill, and I stood in my cold hall and understood that the silence I had wrapped around myself like a shroud had become the very rope by which a frightened, grasping man meant to hang me. I do not know how long I stood there, but I became aware by degrees that I was not alone, that Eleanor had come to the gallery door with a cloth in her hands and stopped, and heard and stayed in the shadow where the shutters kept their dusk. She did not pretend she had not heard. She never pretended anything. "He means to have the house," she said. "He means to have the house. And the clocks are his proof." She came a little into the hall, into the gray light from the one high window Aldous' man had unshuttered. "That you're not fit, that's what he'll point to. 9 dead clocks and a shut-up house." "Yes." She was quiet a moment. Then she said in a different voice, lower, and with something in it I had not heard from her before, something that was almost anger, though not at me. "Then he's a fool as well as a coward, and I'll tell you why. He looked at this house and saw a madman's tomb. I've spent a fortnight in it. I've had my bread in your kitchen with people who have served your family 30 years and love you still, though you've given them precious little to love this while. I've mended 9 clocks a dying man's son couldn't bear to hear, because every stroke of them said his brother was further away. That's not the conduct of a man who's lost his reason, your grace. That's the conduct of a man who loved somebody past all sense and didn't know how to stop." She lifted her chin. "I could tell a commissioner that. I could tell any court in England that. There's a difference between a house that's mad and a house that's mourning, and I've stood in enough of both to know it in the dark." I looked at her, and something in my chest that had been frozen 3 years gave way with a crack I could almost hear. "Why?" I said. "Why would you stand up in a court for a man who forbade you to do your own work properly, and sat in the corners of his own rooms like a ghost, and gave you nothing but his grief for a fortnight?" She looked at me for a long moment. And then she said the thing I have carried in my breast every day since, the thing I will carry to my own last hour. "Because somebody loved this house well enough to fill it with clocks," she said, "and somebody loved his brother well enough to stop them all, and a man with that much love in him going to waste in the cold is the saddest thing I've seen in a year full of sad things, and I'll not stand by and let a coward in a fine carriage call it madness. That's why." Her voice was not quite steady. "Now, do you want them wound or don't you?" "Because I've cleaned every movement in this house, and they're all of them ready to keep the hour the moment you say the word. And I think your brother would say the word if he could. I think he's been trying to say it through me for a fortnight, and I've been too respectful of your orders to let him." I did not answer her at once. I could not. 3 years I had held those 2 fingers against the pendulum of my life, and a woman was asking me, plainly in the gray light of my own hall, to lift them. "If I wind them," I said, and my voice was not my own, "then it moves. Then it is 20 minutes past 3 no longer, and it is 4, and it is 5, and it is tomorrow, and the day after, and every hour carries him further, and I let it. I consent to it. Do you understand? So long as they stand still, I have not agreed to a world that goes on without him. To wind them is to agree." I had never said it aloud. I had never let myself know it so clearly. And having said it, I braced for what everyone else had given me, the gentle correction, the "but he would want you to live," the sermon that treats a grief as a sum to be reasoned away. She did not give me that. She came and stood before me, closer than anyone had stood to me in 3 years, and she looked up into my face with those steady gray eyes gone bright now, and she said, "No, Your Grace, that's backward, and it's the thing grief tells every one of us, and it's a lie. Winding them isn't agreeing he's gone. It's the only way left to keep him." She put her hand, I remember the warmth of it, the small callus at the base of each finger from a lifetime of work. She put her hand flat against the front of the stopped long case clock, over the still pendulum behind the glass. "When this strikes 3 tomorrow and the next day, and 40 years from now, it'll be striking the hour he died, every single day, and every single day it'll go straight on through it into 4 and 5 and the whole rest of a life. That's not leaving him behind. That's carrying him forward. That's the hour of his death folded into every hour after it, so that he's in all of them, so the house is full of him instead of frozen at him. A stopped clock only says he died. A running clock says he lived and lives, and the hour that took him could not stop the ones that came after, and here they come." Her voice broke, just once. "My father's watch strikes in my pocket every hour of my life. I wound it the morning after we buried him, and I've never let it stop. That's not me agreeing he's gone. That's me keeping his hands over mine forever. Let me give you that. Let me wind your brother's house." And I have tried many times to describe what happened in me then, and I have never found the words, and I will not spoil it now by pretending to. I will only tell you what I did. I reached past her, and I opened the door of the long case clock, and I took the winding key from the little hook inside where my grandfather had left it, and where it had hung untouched 3 years, and I could not make my hand steady, and she saw, and she did the thing that undid me entirely and remade me. She laid her hand over mine, the way her father had laid his over hers, and she guided the key to the winding square, and together, her hand over mine, my hand on the key, we wound the great clock of Harrowmere. I felt the weights rise. I felt the movement take the tension and hold it, 3 years of stillness gathering into readiness. And then she reached in with her free hand and set the pendulum swinging. One push, gentle, the push I had held against 3 years before, and it swung and caught and swung, and the old escapement took up its work with a sound I had not heard since the night my brother died. Tick! I wept. I'm not ashamed to write it. A duke, a grown man in his own cold hall, wept like a child at the sound of a clock, with a clockmaker's daughter's hand still over his on the key. And she did not step back, and she did not look away, and she did not tell me to be easy. She stood and let me weep, her hand warm over mine, and the great clock ticked and ticked, counting the first hin 3 years, counting me back into the world. And then it struck. It was not 3. It was gone 11 in the morning, and it struck 11. 11 slow bronze strokes rolling out through the frozen house, into the gallery and up the stair and along the shuttered corridors, and I swear to you the house itself seemed to shudder and wake, as though it had been holding its breath as long as I had. And from far off, faint, I heard another clock answer, the bracket clock in the drawing room, which she must have wound in some stolen moment against my orders. God bless her disobedience. And then, in the days that followed, all of them, one by one, the whole 9, until Harrowmere rang the hours again like the friendly, imperfect peal of her father's shop, the strokes coming in a little apart, so that the hour arrived not as a single blow, but as a thing that gathered and rolled and filled the house with the sound of being alive. I threw open the shutters myself, every one. We were wed in the spring, in the little church at Kettleby, with the whole village in the pews, and Mrs. Poole, weeping into her good handkerchief, and old Tenby, got up in a coat from the last century, and I did not care a straw for the county's raised eyebrows at a Duke of Harrowmere marrying the clockmaker's daughter from the village below. And there were raised eyebrows, and I will tell you plainly I have never in my life enjoyed anything so much as ignoring them. Eleanor wore no borrowed grandeur. She wore a gown the color of the moor in June and her mother's small pearls, and she carried her father's repeater watch, and when the vicar asked was there any who knew just cause, the whole church turned as one to look at the empty place where a man in a fine carriage might have stood to object, for Aldous had heard by then what Harrowmere had become. He had come up the hill one last time, in March, expecting a tomb, and found the shutters open and the clocks striking and fires in every grate, and the master of the house on the terrace with a plain young woman, both of them laughing at something, and dogs. I had got dogs, Julian's kind of dogs, absurd and muddy and loud. Aldous had stood in the drive and understood, I think, all at once, that there would be no commission, no court, no unfit master, no Harrowmere for him. He did not come in. He turned his fine carriage in my drive and went back down my hill, and I have not seen him since, and I bear him no ill will, for a frightened, grasping man is only a man who never had someone lay a warm hand over his and teach him he need not be afraid. I had nearly been that man. I know how near. The commissioners came in April and found a house kept in good order and repair, every clock in it keeping faithful time, and went away satisfied, and the estate was settled, and none of it mattered to me half so much as the woman standing beside me in the hall when they had gone, sliding her father's watch back into her pocket with a small private smile. "You wound the drawing-room clock," I said to her that day, "against my orders, weeks before I gave the word." "I did," she said, unrepentant. "When?" "The 3rd night. When I heard you standing outside the door, listening to me hum, thinking I didn't know you were there." She looked up at me, and there was the ghost of the place a smile goes, the one I had learned to read on that first morning, only now it had come all the way out and become the smile itself. "A house wants at least 1 clock running, your grace, even a morning house, especially a morning house. Somebody has to keep the hour till the master's ready to keep it himself. I thought I'd best do it quietly and let you find your own way to the rest." She smoothed my coat, a small wifely gesture that I have never in the years since grown tired of. "You took your time, but you came." That was many years ago now. Our children have grown up in a house full of the sound of clocks, 9 of them, and now a 10th, a little one I commissioned from a Kettleby maker as a wedding gift for my wife, though she says the old ones are better made, and she is right. On the 9th of November each year the great clock in the hall strikes 3, and we are quiet a moment, all of us, and I tell the children about their Uncle Julian and his leaking boats, and then the clock goes on, into 4 and 5, and the whole rest of the day, carrying him forward, folding his hour into hours, keeping him in every hour instead of freezing us at the one that took him. My wife was right about that, as she has been right about nearly everything. A running clock does not leave the dead behind. It carries them with it always, into every hour that comes. I was the most feared man in 3 counties once, the silent Duke, the master of the tomb on the hill, and I was saved. There is no other word, and I have stopped looking for a smaller one. I was saved by a clockmaker's daughter who was not afraid of me, who told me the truth, who laid her warm hand over my cold one, and taught me that the bravest thing a grieving man can do is let the hour move. She is downstairs now. I can hear the clocks striking the half, one after another, rolling through the warm, bright house she made of my frozen one, and under them, faint, the low thread of a tune she hums and still does not know she hums, the friendliest sound in the world. I stopped all the clocks at Harrowmere once, to keep from losing my brother. A clockmaker's daughter made them chime again, and gave me back not only the hours, but every soul I had shut out in the cold along with them, and taught me at the last that to be chosen is a fine thing, but to be seen plainly and loved anyway, and handed back your own life with a warm hand over yours, is the finest thing this world has got. I would not trade one striking hour of it, not one.